Before we set up our management interface, let me explain some of the relevant concepts to keep in mind. When the Big IP is installed, or if it is new out of the box, these are the defaults that can be used. So the default management IP address on a Big IP is 192.168.1.245. This means that if you have the management interface plugged into some switch and your computer is connected to that same switch and is using a 192.168.1. some type of address, you can access the web utility interface of the Big IP appliance. And by the way, the decimal value of 245 that you see in the fourth octet is F5 in hexadecimal. So that's an easy way for memorizing that address. There are also some default accounts that will be used for accessing our Big IP in the video labs. There is a root account that is used for accessing the console of the Big IP, and there is a default admin account which is used for logging into the web utility interface. You can access and administer the Big IP in several ways depending on what you want to do. And the methods are CLI access or command line interface access using the console port, or connecting using SSH. There is the LCD panel if you are using a hardware appliance, and there is the web utility, which is a web GUI interface. If you want to change the management IP of the Big IP, you can use any of these options to do so. However, if you want to administer server pools, virtual servers, setting up different load balancing methods, you need to use the web utility, which is what we will be using most of the time. If you are using the console to set up the management IP for a hardware appliance unit, make sure that the serial connection settings on your client program like PuTTY or Hyperterminal is set to these particular parameters. At this time, our Big IP appliance has been set up and powered on, which you will see right here under the resource group called Server Farm. So now in this video, we're going to assign an IP address to the management interface on our appliance based on our network diagram. So let's go to the virtual machine for that appliance and make sure that you're under the console tab. So as we talked about before, the default IP address or the default management IP address for all Big IP appliances, hardware or virtual, is 192.168.1.245. So we have the option of having a computer that's on the same network plugged into the management network, and we can use the web utility for changing the IP address. But you can also change the IP address through the console, and this is what we would do since we don't want to set up a separate computer just to change the IP. And therefore, this is what the console screen looks like for the appliance, which will present a login prompt. Now, based on our design, let's bring up a DOS window here. This will be the IP that we will assign to the management interface that we will use for managing our Big IP appliance. So let's do a continuous ping to that IP address. And once that IP is configured, it should be pingable from our network. Now let's log in. So the default username is root. Let's go and type that in here. And the default password is default. Okay, so upon the first login, you will see a Linux kernel prompt, which is the operating system that the Big IP appliance is built on. And the prompt will include the text no license because no license file has been installed yet. We will deal with all of that once we access the web utility interface. Now, to change the management IP from the console, we need to type in the command config. Okay, and doing that, this will open the configuration utility for changing the management address. So let's press enter to proceed. Okay, and here, this will reflect the default address and its mask. So we do not want to use this as a best practice, so we will select no. Okay, and we will enter our new management address. And it will use a Class C mask, which is already defined here based on the default address. So we'll say OK. And this page is telling us if we want to set up a default gateway for the management port. So we're going to set up a default gateway so we can access our Big IP appliance from other networks internally. So we're going to say yes. And let's enter the correct default gateway address, which basically points to our core. Okay, and these settings look correct, so let's apply our changes. That is now completed, and it puts us back to the system prompt that we see here. And we are able to ping the management address of our Big IP appliance. So now we're ready to access the Big IP using the web utility interface.